Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode number 32. My guest is Boyd Epley, the first ever paid strength coach in America. Known to many, including my former strength coach at Yale, Thomas Newman, as the founder of strength and conditioning in the United States, and in particularly at the collegiate level. Boyd Epley is truly a pioneer of training the human body. His knowledge and expertise, matched with his inspiring story, unique perspectives, and outstanding experience, separate him from the rest. For roughly 5 decades, Boyd built the University of Nebraska's strength and conditioning from the ground up, producing All-Americans and winning national championships along the way. I'd be remiss not to include how forward-thinking, kind, and giving Boyd remains to this day. It's a privilege to learn from him and to have him on here today. Boyd, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me.
So I want to start where it started for you. Can you share kind of when you got first introduced to weightlifting and how things progressed quickly for you from high school all the way up to your time at Nebraska?
Well, my very first experience with weights happened when I was in the 5th grade and I was 10 years old. I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. I was born in Nebraska and lived there the first 10 years, but my parents thought I might have asthma. And so at that time, people were recommending that you move to Phoenix, Arizona. Now, that's not the case there now, but at the time, that was where you were supposed to go. And I didn't really have a problem. Like I didn't have to use an inhaler. It wasn't very serious, but yet they took it serious. So first day of school, I met a guy named Danny Lundberg, and he asked me if I wanted to come over to his house. He had a garage out back that had weights, and I had never heard or seen anything like that. So I said, okay. So I went over there, and a third guy, Ronnie Wilson, went with us. And Ronnie wasn't a very muscular guy. He was a little leaner, and where Danny was a little more muscular like I was. And anyway, we come into the garage and there's a bar with 65 pounds on it. And instead of showing us how to lift it or why or what it would do for us or anything about it or stretching or warm up or anything like that, he just said, see if you can lift this. Well, Ronnie tried first and he fell. The bar landed on him. That was my first experience watching somebody lift weights. And so then it was my turn. So I lifted it and managed to get it up on a cleaned it from the ground to my chest and put it back down. And so Danny did it also. So that was where I learned without any coaching what lifting was. My next experience was in 7th grade when my dad bought me a 110-pound set. The set came with instructions on how to become a weightlifter. So it didn't have anything to do with athletes or how you might want to train as an athlete. It was instructions on weightlifting, the snatch and the clean. And so that wasn't really what I needed to learn in 7th grade. So I didn't pay much attention to that. And the weights just kind of were under my bed for a few years. But when I went to high school, I went to a brand new high school at Alhambra in Phoenix, Arizona. Alhambra was brand new, and they had a weight room for their students and their athletes. And that was pretty progressive at the time. And they also taught some weight training classes. And so I didn't think anything of it. I didn't realize it was kind of a new thing. It just was one of the options. So I decided to take the class. And the instructor was Hugh Morrison, the head football coach, and also the head track coach. And this coach, Hugh Morrison, really impacted my life, not just in that class, but I played football for him and was also a pole vaulter for him. And since I was the strongest in the class, I kind of liked being the strongest in the class and kind of got into it and started actually training to improve my athletic potential in football and track. So that had a pretty big influence on me. I didn't realize I was ever going to be a strength coach. There wasn't such a thing at the time, but my head football coach was about the closest thing to that. He was teaching a weight training class to young sophomores and juniors and seniors. We didn't have any freshmen. Since it was a brand new school, they didn't have any freshmen at all. So it was just those three classes. So he was a big influence on my life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you your earliest influences and role models next. For context, you used the word progressive in terms of having a weight room in your high school. Could you talk a little bit about like where things were at in terms of weightlifting in context of years and how progressive it was for the time?
Actually, Arizona was progressive in some other ways. As a pole vaulter, I broke my leg just before the state track meet, and even though I held the school record and was supposed to do well in the state meet, I didn't get to go. That meant I didn't get a scholarship to Arizona State to pole vault because I didn't even go to the state track meet. So I accepted a scholarship to Phoenix College, which is a junior college. And they were pretty good in track. Our freshman year, we won the national championship as a team. I got fourth in the nation in the pole vault. And the next year, as a captain of the team, we won the national championship again. And I got second in the nation, although I did set the national junior college pole vault record. But Phoenix College had weight training classes for students, which was really kind of rare at the time. So I signed up for one of those classes. Unfortunately, it was about isometrics. It was a class teaching you how to, what isometrics are is where you push against a fixed bar at different heights. Well, that doesn't really build muscle like we think of today. It was kind of a waste of my time, but I did learn, you've got to try things to learn whether they work or not. So somewhere along the line, up to that point, I figured out that I needed to be doing squats because in order to carry the pole as a pole vaulter, which is about 120 feet, which is 40 yards, I was carrying a pole 40 yards every time I ran. And you'd practice 18, 20 times in practice, and during the meet, maybe 8 or 10 times. And so I got to where I kind of knew the squat was helping me get faster. I didn't seek that, didn't figure out, it was some mission I had to find out. It's just something that I picked up, that if you do squats, your legs are going to get stronger. You're going to have more force against the ground, and you're actually going to improve your speed. So I had that kind of in my back pocket when I got a scholarship then to the University of Nebraska. So I go to Nebraska, and they had a weight room for athletes, but it only had one set of weights, one squat rack, one bench press, and it was 414 square feet. But at the physical education department, which I was a PE major, I figured I'd be a track coach someday. They had a weight room for students, and they offered classes, and they had multiple sets of weights, and they had intramural lifting competitions. And so it was the athletic department that was kind of behind, not necessarily the students or the rec center or and so across the nation, I'm not sure what was going on there, but athletes across the country just were not being told they should lift weights to improve their performance. It might be happening somewhere in pockets, and I might not have been the first strength coach. There may be someone out there that would claim to have been a strength coach or was helping athletes. But Nebraska took a chance on me when I got hurt, what would have been my senior year in college. As a junior, I came in, broke the pole vault record the very first meet, had a pretty good in-season. In the off-season, I broke my leg. So I get ready for my senior year, and I hurt my back. The doctor said, "We're going to redshirt you, give your back time to heal. There's a chance we may never let you pole vault again because we're afraid if you do, you might get paralyzed." So I went a whole year being redshirted. Instead, I couldn't graduate. I had to postpone graduation and train. Well, in training, I spent a lot of time in the football weight room, but it was so small and didn't have very much equipment that I would go over to the student weight room. And I kind of got into some weightlifting over there. They had intramural competition, so I actually learned how to do Olympic lifting and powerlifting. And one day a guy told me he was going to go enter a bodybuilding meet. And I looked at him, I said, I could beat you. And so I decided I'd go do it too. So not long after that, I started to have an opportunity for my final senior year after waiting a whole year. It's kind of like this COVID thing. I had to, people kind of had to put everything on hold for about a year.
Sure.
And then I had the opportunity, and the doctor said, we've discussed this. We're just not going to let you pole vault anymore. And so my pole vaulting career ended unexpectedly. But they said, since you've been spending so much time in the weight room, Coach Tom Osborne wants to talk to you. So I went and talked to Coach Osborne. He wasn't the head coach at the time. He was the receivers coach, and Bob Devaney was the head coach. And Nebraska was at a point in their football program where they had great success when Devaney became the head coach. Early on, they won almost every game. They played so well. They played a national championship in 1965 and lost to Arkansas. When they lost to Arkansas, the public and the coaches thought, well, we need to get quicker or something, because Arkansas had these little quick guys. And so they put all the players on a diet, and they had them do distance running. And they lost 15 to 20 pounds per person. And in 66 and 67 and 68, they didn't play very well, and they were winning like they were 6-4 in 67 and 68, I believe. But the worst thing was they lost to Oklahoma 47-0 on national TV, the last game of the year. And that's when they realized that losing the weight on these players wasn't quite the right thing, that they needed to get stronger because they were getting pushed around. Losing the weight really was kind of the worst thing they could have done. And so they were looking for help. And just at the same time, I became available as a guy in the weight room that was stronger than any of the football players. And so they thought, well, we should ask this guy, maybe he'd help us. And there wasn't one player that could bench press 300 pounds, which is shocking. I mean, you just can't imagine that today. I mean, the receivers and everybody would be able to probably do that at this time, but not back then, not even the linemen. And so they asked me if I would do that, and I was happy to do it. And they paid me $2 an hour, 2 days a week. And so I had this opportunity, but I wasn't sure that I could pull it off, because I'm basically the same age as some of these guys. I mean, the seniors, I was maybe 1 year older than them. And I hung around with some of these guys and, go have some beer with them at the bar or something. And I'm going to be their boss in the weight room, see. So I went to the department chairman of physical education, which I was taking classes there and had taken classes there for a couple of years then. And I asked the department chairman, Dr. Carl Weir, how would you approach this? And he said, well, if I was you, I would get them to sign up for a weight training class. And he said, if you want, I can make you the instructor. And then they would have to have attendance in order to get a good grade. And if they didn't have attendance, didn't do what you told them they should do, the grade would not be good. That would hurt their grade average. That would eventually catch up to them, and they wouldn't be able to play football. So you got to have good grades in order to be an athlete. Everybody knows that. So it made sense. And so he made me the instructor of 2 classes. I ended up teaching those 2 classes for like 17 years or so.
Wow.
And expanded it from in season to the off season and even summer conditioning. Like I kept creating whatever we needed into a class, and the class would have over 200 athletes.
Amazing.
And that way they got credit, and the university got money because the athletes had to pay for the class. It was just a good deal on all fronts. And then I had some leverage from an instructor point of view over the athletes.
How was that for you dealing with the end of your pole vaulting career? Was that tough for you to cope, or did you feel like you poured yourself even more into weightlifting once that happened?
Well, it was hard for me because I didn't believe I was actually injured to the point where if I tried to pole vault again, I'd be paralyzed. I had an imbalance in my back, and I did have to wear a back brace, a thing that wrapped around you. And like if I wanted to play racquetball, had to have the brace. Or if I tried to play golf, I had to have the brace. But I could walk around, I could sit, and I wasn't in pain all the time. Every once in a while, it would get real bad. But it was more being out of whack, something out of place, an imbalance than what I thought. But I listened to the doctors and did what they said. But years later, probably 10 years later, after being a strength coach for many years, a man walked into my office carrying what looked like a knee brace. Looked just like a knee brace, but it wasn't. It was a device that he'd invented. His name was Ron Haruska. Ron Haruska is the expert in postural restoration, and he's from Lincoln, Nebraska. And he comes in and he introduces himself, and he says, I've kind of followed your career here at Nebraska, and I understand that you had this back injury. And he says, I don't believe you have a serious back injury. I've watched you walk. I've kind of paid attention to how you move. I see you lift. I don't think you have a real bad back that needs surgery. I said, well, okay, what do I need then? He says, I brought you a device. I'm going to give it to you for free. I want you to wear this like a knee brace. And on at the knee joint, it had two resistors, one on each side, and you could set the resistance so that as you walked, your hamstring would contract with resistance. So each step that I took, there was a little resistance on the hamstring. He said, that's going to cause your hamstring to shorten. That's going to pull your back into alignment, because that's what's wrong. Your back's out of alignment and putting a lot of pressure on your right side when the problem is on your left side. And it's your left hamstring. And so I said, well, that seems to make sense. So I took the thing home with me that night and showed it to my wife. Actually, when I went home, she was outside, sitting outside. So I carried it outside, and we had this swimming pool, and we had this pool house. And so she's sitting out there reading the paper. I showed the thing to her, and I just left it there. I forgot about it. So about 4 or 5 days later, it was a Sunday morning, I couldn't get out of bed. My back was going the wrong direction. I hadn't worn the thing yet. I just took it home, and as people give you things all the time, you don't know if they're any good or not. So I didn't try it immediately, but I asked her, where the heck did I put that thing? She says, you put it out in the pool house. Okay, so I walk out there, hobbling, in pain. I get the thing, I put it on my left leg, and I walk back to the house, which is maybe 100 feet, and my back was fine.
Wow.
This hamstring had, I could feel it contracting, and not any of the rest of my body, just the left hamstring. And all of a sudden my pelvis lined up and the pain was gone. And I mean, gone. So I started wearing that thing. Well, I squatted 405 on my 74th birthday, June 2nd. I don't have a bad back. I had a back that was out of alignment.
Right.
So, but anyway, it changed my life, changed my career.
Yeah.
Created a whole opportunity for me, and I wasn't really in need of surgery at all.
Yeah. When I was a senior in high school, also a student athlete, I went through a stress fracture in my L2, L4 and had to wear a back brace. And for years after, I was still dealing with hamstring, and I knew how important it was for me to keep my hamstrings loose. One of my mentors always says to me, following something that goes wrong in your life, you should always say, because of this, something good will happen. And that's certainly the case for you. I mean, you had this physical injury that allowed you to become the first paid strength coach for Nebraska. How quickly did the team, staff, players see results once they started taking, you had command and they started following your guidance when it came to training?
Well, it was pretty immediate because these are healthy young guys that had a lot of potential, and they just unleashed it in the weight room. And what I made a mistake as I look back on it now, because I made a big deal out of the bench press. That was the most popular exercise. And I imagine a lot of other coaches have made the same mistake, putting too much emphasis on that, because the bench press recognizes a guy that has shorter arms that can lift more weight. And in athletics, you want leverage. Most athletic movements, you require leverage. And so instead of having guys with what I call alligator arms, alligators have little short arms, they could bench press more. But anyway, I bought a bunch of shirts. And if somebody could bench press 300 pounds perfectly, and I had to come judge it, I watched every one of them. And if it was perfect, I gave them a t-shirt, 300-pound club. Well, then the club grew to 325, then 350, then 375, and then finally to 400. Larry Cooley was our first 400-pound lifter for football. And he, of course, he was a guard and had shorter arms. He was also very strong. And then the record grew to 500 pounds. Lawrence Pete was the first 500-pound. He was a middle guard. But anyway, after Lawrence did 500, Mike Arthur, my top assistant through the years, we just finally decided to take the bench press out of our testing.
Wow.
Because there was too much emphasis. High school kids, that's all they want to talk about. How much can you bench?
Right.
So we quit testing the bench press and focused on two lifts that really do measure what needs to be measured. And that would be the squat and the hang clean. Power clean would be the same, hang or power, either way, but those two lifts. And then we created an index based on how much you weigh to identify who was really good there.
I was going to ask you about the index in a little bit, but as we've spoken to on the phone in the past, up until the late 1960s, there was a lot of talk that a muscle-bound athlete was slower. How did you deal with overcoming that dogma and getting the coaches, staff, and the players to believe in what you were saying to the point where they stopped running distance and they started listening to you?
Well, I didn't tell you how I actually got the job. I did say that I went over and talked to Coach Osborne, and he asked me if I would do it. And I said, you need more equipment because you can't get hardly anybody in that weight room. And then you're going to need more space. He explained to me that he could have a wall torn down, which was right next door. There was a classroom, and he showed film in that classroom to his receivers each afternoon. He said, you'd have to let me keep showing the film like at 3 or whatever it was, between 2 and 3 or 3 or 4, whatever. But otherwise, you could have that room as the weight room also. So it went from 400 square feet to like 1,200 by adding that classroom. And then he asked me for a list of equipment. So I brought him the list, and he said, this is it now. I said, yeah. And he handed it to the secretary. I said, order this. I said, but Coach, I forgot to bring you the second page. He laughed. He's pretty sharp cookie. He goes, okay. Bring me the second page tomorrow. So I didn't realize it'd be this easy. So the next day I bring him things that I hadn't put on the first list. The first list was bench press racks and squat racks and things and weights, just sets of weights and stuff. But the second list was more pulleys and some things that I didn't think they would probably approve if they were watching out for their budget. But he was serious about it. And so I included quite a few things there. He looks at the second list and he goes, hands it to the secretary, says, order this. Then he turns to me and he says, now we need to go in and see Bob. And I go, Bob? And he goes, Bob Devaney. And I go, oh, I start shaking a little bit. He was the head coach And that athletic director, he was the most powerful man in the state of Nebraska, and there's no question about that. So we go around the corner of the secretary's desk into Coach Devaney's office, and Tom didn't waste any time. He just says, you know Boyd Epley here? And he goes, oh yeah, I've seen you in the weight room. How are you doing now? And then he says, Boyd thinks we should have the football team lift weights. Straight out. And Coach Devaney just kind of says, well, why would we want to do that? So I don't know of anybody that has their football team, but my friend Duffy Doherty's the head coach at Michigan State. They don't lift weights. I can't think of any team that lifts weights. Why would we want to do that? They both looked at me. To be honest, I don't remember what I said because I was shaking. I recognized this was a great opportunity for me, and I don't remember what I said, but I remember what Bob Devaney said back to me. He said, all right, we're going to give this a try because Tom thinks it's important. But if anybody gets slower, you're fired. Well, I wasn't even hired, but so what that did for me, Mark, was that it put me in a position where I needed to identify that the players were actually getting faster. So I needed to test them. And so I asked around after that meeting, and nobody seemed to have a stopwatch. So I went back to the physical education department chairman, which I had talked to you about before, and told him I needed to test these players on the 40-yard dash like the NFL guys do, but we don't have a stopwatch. He said, oh, you can use one. Here's one. So he gave me a stopwatch. So we started testing these guys every 2 weeks, which was a mistake. You don't want to test your athletes every 2 weeks on a 40-yard dash because it's too dangerous for, possible muscle pulls. But I wanted to show them where the players were at. And so over time, we figured out to make it just kind of at the start of the season and at the end of the season before the winter program or your conditioning program will start. And we were able to show at least a 0.2 improvement after a conditioning period, which was significant. So if you're running a 4.9, you could get down to a 4.7 if you did the squats properly, didn't do a bunch of distance running because that destroys your speed gains. And people didn't know that. I had a real issue with that with some of our athletic trainers and even a couple of the coaches. They would say, well, how are you going to be in shape for the fourth quarter if you don't distance run? Well, you know how that works. A football play only lasts 3 to 5 seconds. And then there's maybe 30 to 50 second recovery period between plays. And so there's no distance running. There's no aerobic training at all in the sport of football. And a lot of coaches don't understand that. So that was one of the advantages that I brought to Nebraska early on. But it took me a few years to get this completely fixed because a man named Ken Cooper from Dallas, Texas, did a tremendous job promoting aerobic fitness in many countries around the world. And he's a legend for that. But for the sport of football, no.
Right.
That is not the answer. So if you're hearing me for the first time out there, get it right. Football is explosive sport, and there's no aerobic component at all. So you'll even see that if you're going to run stadium steps, which everybody knows is a powerful movement. Athletes can't even have enough. They have trouble getting to the top of Nebraska Stadium because it becomes too much endurance. They would be better off just running half of the stadium as fast as they can and then recovering and then run it again half. You don't have to get into endurance mode for the sport of football.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to point out is as I was getting ready for this conversation and preparing questions for you, I came across Pearson's Law on your website, where when performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported back, the rate of improvement accelerates. And I've always heard that what is not measured cannot be managed, but that takes things to another level. Do you mind, in your best way possible, explaining to listeners how important specificity of training and training the right energy system is, right? Because our first conversation, that really is what you drove into my mind, and it's so important. And I guess for listeners, I found Boyd Epley because my strength and conditioning coach at Yale was his mentee, Thomas Newman. So Thomas Newman's mentor is Boyd. So it's been a really awesome privilege for me to learn under Tom, who has learned under you. But we're all echoing the same thing, which is specificity of training and training the right energy system.
Well, there's a lot of work been done on energy systems and which sports fit into which category. There's basically 3 energy systems. Fox and Matthews at Ohio State many years ago was this resource that I used first, but there's charts available that will show you that football, there is 0 aerobic component. And basketball is also an anaerobic sport. A lot of people think that, they might understand football is a power sport, no aerobic component, but they will hardly ever agree that basketball is also a very powerful sport. It's a burst sport. But if you look at the research, you'll see that you don't need a lot of distance running for basketball. You need bursts. And so where we came to that conclusion was Mike Arthur and I took video of the running rebels from Las Vegas basketball team. Nevada, Las Vegas they just ran up and down the court, and everybody thought this is unique because they're running all the time. We took that video of their championship game. I can't remember what year it was, but and we made a record of what each player was doing and how long they ran. And like football is 3 to 5 seconds. The basketball was maybe 10 to 12, maybe 15 at the most, but they're not running any longer than that. And that still fits into the explosive, not endurance, but more power. And it doesn't even fit into the middle energy system, which would be more like lactic acid for like wrestling and so forth. Basketball is a burst sport, and people just don't buy it. They don't understand it. And so I would encourage them to go to the research and learn it for yourself.
Yeah, one of the things after we spoke and you were helping me with my Olympic lifts and implementing the snatch is so important, looking for those certain bursts. I actually started watching film with a stopwatch and seeing how exactly were my cuts and runs and when I was just jogging. And when you and I spoke on the phone just the other day, you were talking about how many people believe soccer is an endurance sport. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's one that I just can't seem to get anywhere with soccer coaches. But if you turn on a soccer game, the goalie, of course, doesn't run at all. They might have to move a few feet when the ball comes toward them. They're not running at all. Everybody understands that. But the ones closest to the goalie, they're not running very often either. They're in a burst position. The ones that in the middle of the field, they're running a little bit more. And so they need a little bit more of that length run, not necessarily distance running. And the soccer coaches hearing this right now, they're not going to agree with that. But it's the truth. If you train for power, I guess the best example I don't have a great example on the tip of my tongue for soccer, but I do for football. And that would be a game Nebraska played, the University of Miami. They had Ray Lewis was a great linebacker, and they just had a ton of great athletes. Warren Sapp was a great middle guard. These guys were on oxygen by the end of the game because they hadn't trained in the energy system that I'm telling you they should have. They were doing a little bit more distance run. It wasn't actual mileage, but it was not burst. It was a 440s and 220s, things that were a little longer runs. We had the whole team on board at that time, and they were training what I would say properly. They came out in the first quarter and went right down the field. Miami did, because they were very talented, and scored. Then they started getting tired in the second quarter, and we came down the field and scored. And at halftime, we were tied. We go into the locker room, and Coach Osborne told them, "You guys are just where we want to be here." Now, when they come out in the third quarter, they're going to be tough because they've just recovered during halftime. They're going to be real physical, so just hang in there best you can. And in the fourth quarter, you'll have them where you want them, because we're the better conditioned team, and we will dominate them in the fourth quarter. All right, so what happens is, just like he said, they came out in third quarter, went right down the field and scored again. In the fourth quarter, we went 7 series in a row where they went 3 and out, 3 and out. They couldn't even get a first down. They couldn't get a first down. We scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to win the game. And at the end, as Osborne walks off the field as national champion, those linebackers on Miami's side were on oxygen. And they interviewed Osborne and said, "What was the difference in the game?" And he said, "We knew we'd be the better team in the fourth quarter."
So there you have it. Nebraska was the first fourth quarter program.
That made me feel pretty darn good.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I can tell you're passionate about this. You know, you're the founding father of the National Strength and Conditioning Association.
Yeah, I can't see, I got my shirt on today.
And there you go.
There you go.
There you go. And you're currently on the board of, 4 other companies inside the realm of fitness and training. Could you talk a little bit about why it was so important for you to start the NSCA and why you still stay on these boards and support their missions?
Well, I felt it was important to give back. And I spent a lot of time. The first thing that Coach Osborne had me do was sit down with each recruit that came in and develop a lifting program for that kid. And I had to write it down, and it took me 15, 20 minutes just to, and then they would take it home and they would have a program. No one else was giving them a program. But I had to figure out how to make that process a little quicker. And so I created a manual, and then I created a calendar, and I created a year-round program. And Nebraska was probably the first school to have a year-round training program. I mean, and then I made those classes even into the summer. We had summer conditioning. And so I was constantly spreading the word on how you do it. And people were, I was sending out letters every day to coaches wanting the program, wanting to know what to do. So when I created the NSCA in Lincoln, there were 76 members that came. And one was a female, so I made sure that we were open to have female representatives too, because I always believed in that in everything I did with the classes or anything. I never, a lot of places, females were not allowed in the athletic facilities when I started. They weren't allowed to eat at the training table. They weren't allowed to take those weight training classes for students. I got all that changed at Nebraska. And so the NSCA, it wasn't just me. There were some other people involved. Ken Contour was a journalist type of a student. He hadn't graduated yet, but he was a journalism major. So I asked him if he would help write articles about what Oklahoma is doing or what some of these other big time programs are doing. And they were happy to send in what they were doing. So people were just hungry for information. And we put out a journal. But there were also people writing me letters. And I would receive maybe 75 to 125 letters a day.
Wow.
People across the country asking, how can we start a program like yours? And so I needed a secretary. The athletic director wasn't too keen on a secretary for me at first. But there was something called work study, where you could get the government to help you with a student in need could get paid So I put out a notice to this program that I needed a secretary. So I had a couple of applicants. Neither one of them was a secretary. They were students trying to just get money. But one of them was really smart, a guy named Larry Crouch, who ended up being Dr. Larry Crouch later on. I asked Larry if he would help me take these letters, and they were pretty much the same thing every time, asking how to do it, why do it, what's this, what's that. And so I asked him to write back to him for me. And so he would do 40, 50 letters a day. And then some of them I had to answer myself. The questions were more to a nature that I had to answer myself. So, but the easier ones he handled, and I would read them. The first couple that he wrote were terrible, but they got better. And then he got fantastic. He was very smart, and all of a sudden I'm learning stuff, reading the letters that he's writing for me, that we're sending out to people, and
Wow.
I'm learning things. He was brilliant. And so I
Awesome.
kept him on for several years to do that. And so we were an information revolution. We were sending out quality stuff to anybody that needed to know. And he became a doctor. And one of the manuals, I've written several manuals through the years. Only one was ever dedicated to an individual, and it was to Dr. Larry Crouch.
Oh, wow. That's
he
amazing.
made an impact. He made me look really good and really smart when I'm not.
I think you're overlooking that because you really innovated it. And just to put a top to what we were talking about earlier, what did the weight room end up looking like once you got those things to come through and the order to go through? And how quickly was Nebraska national championship in the national championship and winning when you came on board?
Well, I started in 1969, and the next year we won the national championship in 1970. We had the game of the century versus Oklahoma, and that's being celebrated this year for with the two teams when they play Oklahoma this fall. And the next year we beat Oklahoma in the game of the century, but it wasn't for the national championship. It's to get to go to the Orange Bowl to play LSU, so we beat LSU for the first national championship. The next year we won it again. We won two right away, and then there was a period of time where we didn't win it, and we had a period of time where we were in the top 10 20 years in a row. We were top 10 in the nation 20 years in a row, but things kind of fell off, and we had trouble motivating the players to work hard for some reason. I'm not sure why. So after this 20-year period of success, we lost 3 games in 1 year, and it wasn't good. And we dropped out of the top 10. Maybe we were 17th or something like that. It was still acceptable, but wasn't acceptable to the people in the program. So that winter, something happened there. I kind of stuck my neck out while Coach Osborne was out recruiting. They'd be on the road for several weeks. And I was in charge of the winter program to make sure players were running and lifting and doing what they were supposed to. And the first speaker at this first winter conditioning meeting was always the academic guy. So he got up and made his talk, and the players were just not paying attention. They were being jerks. And they had foot up on the desk or on the chair in front of them and slouching in their chairs. We had lost something. Something was wrong. And I had seen this coming, so I was prepared. And it was just attitude. They didn't have the right attitude. After all that success for 20 years in a row, we all of a sudden had a problem. So my talk was next, and I got up and they were making noise, talking. So I don't have a ring on me right now, but I held up a paperweight that looked like a ring, a big paperweight. And I held it up and I said, guys, This is a national championship ring. I have a plan to get each one of you one of these, but we're going to make some changes. We're going to make them today. Well, some of them have never seen a national champion ring because it's been several years since our team had won them. We'd won Big 8 championships, but so they kind of bought into this was a real ring. It looked like it. I said, we have 3 groups on this team. We have guys that are here because they want to be here. And then we've got guys that are here because they have to be, because their dad or their mom or their uncle or their grandfather played for Nebraska and they're expected to be here, but they're not really here because they want to be. So we got 1, 2, and have to. And we got a 3rd group, not a very big group, but a small little sliver of guys that I'm going to call jerks. They won't do the right lifts. They don't show up to lifting when they're supposed to. They don't run what we ask. We've got one guy in this room that's missed 42 absences in his career. And everybody got real quiet. So I went to the board and I drew a big circle and I said, most of you are this 1-2 group. This other sliver over here is the have to group, and then real skinny little line, the jerks. I said, we need to eliminate these jerks right now. So here's the deal. You're going to be allowed 1 absence in the next winter program, this next 6-week program. And if you miss more than that, you're done. And some guy raised his hand and said, you mean we're off the team if we miss more than once? I said, that's exactly what I just said. So if you don't agree with this, if you want to continue to be a jerk and miss workouts and just come when you want to, then you can leave right now. So nobody left. So I crossed that off. I said, all right, we just eliminated the jerks. Now, I handed out a red shirt that pulls over your jersey. I don't know what those things are called exactly, but they use them in practice to designate offense or defense, different levels of, And so they put this, I said, I want you to take this red shirt and I want you to put it on. I want you to wear it every day. 4 days a week, when you come over to work out, I want this red shirt on as a reminder that you're going to do exactly what we asked you to do. And what we have planned for you is going to really help. But you've got to be there. You've got to actually do the work. Right. You can't just say you're on the team. So they all put this shirt on. Now I said, now, if you're willing to commit to what I'm just telling, and I took like a half hour to explain all that, but I want you to stand now. And they stood. And it actually scared me because it was so powerful. And they stood up and it was like they were ready to go to war right then. And I said, now let's go run, So we went over to the field house and had our first workout. Well, we ended up losing 2 players in those 6 weeks, starting I-back and the starting fullback. But what we got back was a football team. And somewhere about the 5th week, Coach Osborne called me in. He says, well, Boyd, we lost 2 players. And I said, Coach, I know we lost 2 players, but we got back a football team you're going to be really proud of. They've worked hard and they've made progress. And he said, well, Boyd, I don't think we can afford to lose any more. He's real honest, straightforward. And I was hoping we wouldn't lose any more. So anyway, on Monday, the week of testing, which is on a Wednesday, I got them back together and I said, guys, I'm really impressed with your effort. And normally when we test in winter conditioning, we set about 15 to 18 school records, all the different things that we track. I said, on Wednesday, I expect you to break 50 records. And they went, wow, we're that good? I said, you're that good. So on Wednesday, they broke 78 Nebraska school records.
Wow.
They've never had anything like that. They've never made that kind of progress before or since. And the freshmen in that team ended up winning 3 national championships in the 90s.
How dare you say you're not a smart man? Something that blew me away is we were talking on the phone last month, and you tell me that you just squatted 405 as a 74-year-old. Where do you get that fire? Like, we're still to this day, what drives you? Because one of my favorite things in coaching, a quote that goes hand in hand with it, is you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. And you're still squatting at 74, not just a small amount of weight, 405 pounds. Where does that come from?
Well, I'm not sure. I did it when I was 60, and it was hard, and it seemed like I got some respect from the people around the gym that day. And so I did it again when I was 70. And I thought to myself, well, if I do it again when I'm 75, that ought to be enough. That ought to be a statement enough. But so when I turned 74, I said, why wait? I might not live till 75. That's a whole year away. But I'll try to do that again when I'm 75. And I think that'll be the end of that. Because
so you got one more year.
It does put a lot of pressure on my ankles and my feet, just the weight of it.
I could imagine.
But I'm proving to myself that I didn't have a bad back. See,
there you go. We're coming to the fourth quarter of this podcast. Looking back on your illustrious career, what's something you know now that you wish you knew when you were a young strength coach or professional?
I wish I'd have known the thing about the distance running earlier. It took me several years to get that fixed, and Nebraska would have had success sooner. I think if there's one thing that someone out there that's a strength coach that can improve themselves by listening to what we're talking about here today, that's one area that they can get fixed on their own that could make a tremendous impact in their program.
And what would you give to that young strength coach who says, well, what would I replace it with? If they're not doing distance running, what should I have them doing
Burst followed by recovery. Take a look at a football play. It lasts 3 to 5 seconds, and then there's 30 to 50 seconds before they do anything again. That's hard. They're standing in a huddle talking.
So out of curiosity, who is the strongest or best pound for pound athlete you've ever come across?
Well, Mike Arthur, my top assistant, deadlifted 570, weighing 132. That was the world record.
Wow.
And unfortunately, about a month later, I believe Lamar Gant beat that. But I didn't know Lamar. But Mike Arthur was my top assistant for many, many years. And that was pretty incredible for him. He wasn't a big person. He weighed 132 pounds, but he had strength. And that was amazing. Steve Bliss, another one of my early assistants, he set the American record in the bench press. And when Coach Osborne became the head coach following Bob Devaney's career, the offensive line coach from Nebraska decided to go to the University of Miami as the head coach rather than work with Tom. And he asked me to come down to Miami and set up a weight room for him. So I was in the early days there. And well, then I said, okay, there was one guy bought all the weights for him, built a whole weight room, paid for it. And then I said, well, now you need to have somebody run it. You can't just have all this equipment. So they hired Steve Bliss, who set the American record in the bench press at 165 pounds. And he wasn't there very long. And then Woody Hayes called me one day, a legendary coach from Ohio State. He said, Boyd, I just saw this guy in the weight room here at Miami, and they're lifting weights. And you think maybe I should be lifting weights? And I said, yes, you should. He said, how about if I hire this young man? I said, that'd be a good idea, coach. So Steve Bliss had the honor of being the first strength coach at Miami, but not for very long, and the first strength coach at Ohio State. And he was there for many years.
Amazing. If you were to point to one or two messages that you love to get across, whether it's to younger individuals or other coaches, when it comes to training, when it comes to strength and conditioning, what would they be? Are there phrases or messages you find yourself repeating?
I have two for you. Your work habits determine your future. That is one of my quotes that I would put in a weight room. Your work habits determine your future. And the other one is one that someone told me. I was a pole vaulter, and I'm at a big meet in California, and I've missed twice, and I have one jump left. And I'm looking around, and the wind is blowing at me. And when you're pole vaulting, it's better to have the wind behind you. I didn't get my grip right. My hand is bleeding because I put some firm grip on there, and I couldn't get it right, and I tore the skin off my hand. I'm at the end of the runway. I've got one jump left, and my coach is on the other side of the track. And so there's a coach there that kind of was helping out. He's the wrestling coach, but he was helping out with the track. Ron Easton was his name. And he was the head wrestling coach, just helping the track coach. But he wasn't my coach. He wasn't really my pole vault coach. He comes over to me, he goes, "What's wrong, Epley?" I said, "Coach, the wind's in my face. I got one jump left. I got to make this or I'm done. I'll bomb out. My hand's bleeding. I can't get my step right because when I get down there, I'm too close and it's jerking me off the floor." And he just said, "Hey, the great ones adjust," and walked off. I've used that quote every day, multiple times every day since then. So I go down there, make that height, make the next, set the National Junior College pole vault record.
Wow. The power of the single idea, the power of the single idea. Are there any boxes left unchecked, or are there any goals that you're still trying to track down at this point in your career?
I've been pretty blessed. I've had a lot of really over 100 strength coaches work for me, and many of them are very successful now. So got that box checked. I helped the NSCA, and it's just grown tremendously to where they have certified over 65,000 strength coaches now. I helped the CSCCA. I was one of the early board members, the first 10. In fact, Chuck Stiggins was a big part of that. And Chuck and I met, and we said, "Well, who should we put on the board?" And we decided anyone with 10 years experience or more. So we didn't care where they were. If we could find them and they had 10 years experience, they were invited to be on the board. I wanted a woman, and I wanted African-American, and not one of them had 10 years experience. So Mad Dog at Texas was the closest with 7 or 8 years experience at the time. And a girl from Texas A&M had 1 year more than my girl, Courtney Carter. We offered her a board position. She says, "I'll wait until I'm eligible."
Wow.
And so we needed to get them together in one room and talk about how we're going to create this second organization. So I called Tom Profit at Hammer Strength, who was a friend, and said, "We need $5,000 to fly 8 or 9 people to Salt Lake City for a meeting." And he said, "Let me see what I can do." He did it. We brought those folks in, created the organization. And here I was still involved with the NSCA at the time, but they just had an idea that they needed to do this. And so that organization is doing well now. And what's amazing to me is the top 3 people in that organization now are all 3 members of the NSCA also. And I'm both. And so they're both. And so that's a good thing. So
Yeah,
it's all good.
It's not all good, not just all good. I think your ripple effect extends far further than you believe. Just being a Yale lacrosse player, seeing Thomas Newman come in and implement your index right away, and really have that kind of empathy that you have, and that care and the specificity of training. It's allowed the Yale lacrosse program to flourish and win a national championship as well. And I think your ripple effect goes far beyond what you know. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you.
Thank you.
To wrap up here, is there a question that I should have asked you, but perhaps I didn't know you well enough?
You mentioned the index. It's available now. It wasn't when I was at Nebraska. but it's available at boydepley.com. And it's a performance and strength index are two different ones. If you can improve in the weight room, your strength index goes up. That means you're automatically going to improve your talent level, as your performance index will also go up. So if it doesn't work the other way around, you don't get better just running and jumping. You get better lifting, and then you could jump higher. And so when you go in the weight room and do well, your performance improves.
BoydEpley.com. And the final question that I ask everyone, Boyd, you've been inside a powerhouse program and you've seen a lot of great athletes and teams in your time. In your opinion, what makes someone or some team great?
I think a lot of people are born with the potential, but not everybody is able to put it together. And sometimes it helps if you have natural born gift. I'll give an example of a player, Neil Smith. Coach Osborne came to me one day and says, there's a kid from New Orleans that I'm thinking about offering a scholarship to. He's 205 pounds and wants to play defensive line. He's 6'7". So I said, well, I want to meet him. So he flew him in. The kid had 7 foot, 1.5 inch arm span.
Wow.
He's 6'7". He gained 50 pounds in 50 weeks.
Oh.
And lifted heavy and became the fastest defensive lineman, not only in Nebraska's history, but in the NFL at the time. Played for Kansas City and then Denver. So he was born with length, and that gave him an advantage. He had just never lifted and never gained any weight and put it all together. So greatness is waiting for people out there who are born with the talent. They just got to get the opportunity to show it, and then maybe work habits determine their future.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time, Boyd. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and I look forward to the future of our relationship as well.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.